human rights. So you and I know very well that we do have two amazing individuals with a wealth of information that will go a long way in shining a light on some of the problems that have dogged this country since the COVID-19 pandemic struck in March of 2020. One of which is the high cases of teenage pregnancies that have dogged this country. 600,000 teenage pregnancies have been actually orchestrated in our country, and they actually amount to human rights violations because most of these teenagers were actually forced into these relationships. We would also like to talk about the working environment through which the female human rights defenders have been able to execute their work. How debilitating has it been, or how enabling has been that environment for these human rights defenders, the female defenders, if you will. Let me introduce my guests. A very good morning, Ms. Faith Tushabe, and also Jane Francis Olaine. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Anthony.
Indeed. Let's start with Ms. Faith Tushabe. Let's talk about what you've seen in the field as a socio-community worker. We're talking about 600,000 teenage pregnancies being executed during the last 2 years when we grappled with this COVID-19 disease. We've seen 17,000 of those young girls subjected to early marriages. Yeah. Paint for us a picture, a situation analysis, if you will, of how dire the situation is in our communities as far as teenage pregnancies and child marriages are concerned.
Thank you very much. Like you said, it's a very bad situation.
Indeed.
Because for the last 2 years, the children have not been in school.
Indeed.
And so you can imagine a situation where the children are at home, redundant, and staying in the community. And so in different areas in different parts of the country, so many children, so many young girls have been impregnated. They're pregnant, and if you remember some of the statistics that were brought out when the senior 4 and senior 6 students were going to sit for the exams, we have had so many children, so many young girls impregnated, and some of them through incest. Through incest, some of them have been defiled, some of them have been raped, but because of the redundancy, there's been a high level, a high rate, so many girls being impregnated. And probably as a human rights defender, when it comes to how we try to defend the rights of these young girls, then we get a challenge of the traditional notions about what a family should be and what the roles should be. And therefore, the challenges we've had as women human rights defenders is that we have been judged, we have been abused, we have been called names when we are trying to defend the rights of these young girls. Because you will agree with me that whereas these girls who are pregnant will stay at home, the people who impregnate them are back at school.
Indeed.
And some of them are really men who are married. Some of them are actually parents through incest. And so the lives of these young girls and their future is affected. Their education and their career, their future career is affected. And therefore, that's one of the challenges we've faced, if you may.
Resistance from the community.
Yes. The public, the way the public looks at us as human rights defenders. And by nature, women have that motherly love.
Indeed.
Whether they are married, whether they are mothers, whether they are not, we have that natural instinct to protect the rights of children, the rights of their girl, because we see ourselves in them, and we have been through that, through the lifestyle of a young girl. And therefore, when these young girls are impregnated, it affects us, and you'll find that some of the human rights defenders, the women rights defenders, are traumatized by what is happening. When we read about the rising numbers of teenage pregnancies, and then we look at, in the meantime, we are trying to see that the education levels of women are increased, are better, and then here comes COVID, and then we have so many young girls being impregnated, meaning that the future of the young girls from the different parts of the country, depending on the tradition of beliefs of these communities, will affect the future of most of the young girls in Uganda.
And here you are as a socio or community worker going into these communities trying to advance some kind of help to these young girls. And what do they say? And they are saying you are abating the problem.
Yes,
you're increasing the pregnancy.
Actually they think we are promoting teenage pregnancies.
How so?
Because when we try to fight, when we try to advocate, when we try to talk to the parents, to have these teenage girls go back to school. To the other community members, it's like we are promoting teenage pregnancy. It's like we are setting a bad example for the other young girls to come out and to also get pregnant at will, which is not actually true. And many times when parents don't understand that when you educate a girl, you have educated the nation. And after all, when this girl is educated, I mean, she will be able to look after the baby. So you find that we have a continuous problem in the community if this girl does not go back to school.
Intergenerational cycle of poverty.
Sure, yes. Yeah.
Wow. Jan Francis Oling, she is the Executive Director for Women in Development, and she's going to be talking to us about how dire this situation is unfolding in our communities. You do have members of the community who are saying you are abating the problem because they see how well rehabilitated these young girls are. And we're getting information that when they see their counterparts or, fellow young girls being rehabilitated very well by these NGOs, they also want to become pregnant so that they get the same service from the human rights defenders. And of course, these are the accusations coming in from the community. Members saying you are egging on these young girls to become pregnant because they know the rehabilitation comes with some little bit of money, economic empowerment, and so forth. How largely is this true?
I would like to say it's completely false.
Indeed.
Because our intention, our sole intention is one, to make sure these girls are already safe somewhere in a GBV shelter by getting pregnant as a child and through incest, as my colleague has just put it.
Indeed.
It's already bad enough. This is violence, it's emotional violence, it's everything bad. It has everything bad to do with this child. So we take them and make sure they're safe somewhere, and so that we deliver justice home, we can take them, the perpetrators, to court and make sure these little children who are already made pregnant and their future messed up with have justice and they have somewhere to start from. So when we take these girls to a GBV shelter, it's not true that we are trying to attract the others who are out there to join the shelter so they can have the same kind of support that we are giving to these other girls. And also to go back to our cultural institutions, how they look at the women human rights defenders. I think in many occasions they think we are half men, half women, because it is unusual in Africa and most of our cultural norms here in Uganda for a woman to stand up and defend the rights of other women.
The first question community will ask,
are you married? Does your husband talk in the house? If you're married, then the man is in trouble.
Because of how vocal you are in these communities.
Yeah, and it's high time our communities get to know that defending the rights of other women does not mean you're indisciplined, does not mean you're a very unique woman out there who is half man, half woman. It has nothing to do with any mentality that is combative, let me put that word. But we are simply rising up to defend the rights of our counterparts, and as she put it, we've been there and we know what it means for a girl child to be raised in a particular, I mean, we are trying to make sure these girls don't grow up within violence.
The perpetrator is a father or an uncle. They should be in a safe environment.
Imagine even the father will make his or her, will make his own daughter pregnant. And then the mother will have to protect. Now that's a perfect woman who protects the husband even when she knows the husband has committed sexual crimes against his own daughter. So there you're a perfect woman.
So now, communities are protecting the perpetrators?
They do against our wish and in the name of culture, because these things are totally wrong. Let us not hide behind the culture or cultural norms to think that girls should continue to be defiled and the perpetrators are protected because they are fathers or brothers of these girls. And incest is even wrong. This is why we want the Parliament of Uganda to strengthen some of these laws against, issues of incest. They have to strengthen that so that these men and boys have to be arrested, taken to court, and then even jailed, so that their other colleagues can learn. We need to give girls some safe space, and we need to understand the women human rights defenders who are defending the rights of these girls, that they're simply doing a good job. we are trying to make sure they're safe, and when they're educated, the nation is. So we are trying to make sure our country only gets better by defending the rights of these girls and women.
Thank you very much, Jane Francis Oling. She's also a member, or the chairperson indeed, of the Technical Thematic Working Group of the National Coalition of Human Rights Defenders here in Uganda. My other guest, Tushabe, is also a member, yes, of the Technical Thematic Working Group of the National Coalition of Human Rights Defenders right here in Uganda. What is entailed in this organization? Well, Oling shall be telling us. Well, let me get back to you, Tushabe. Tushabe, the members of community are pushing back when they see human rights defenders, the female human rights defenders. Do you think such actions are going to actually exacerbate this problem, set a bad precedence whereby a culture of silence is instigated? Victims refuse to come out to report simply because my family will throw me away out of the house, either out of the community or out of the village. Do you think this is going to push the culture of silence to astronomical levels?
Yes, it is going to push a culture of silence because look at how many people defile and they are let loose from the police custodies. And so when a perpetrator is let loose and is back to the village, and the villagers or the community people, community members are able to see the same person who defiled a child, his or her own, a child, a grandchild, a brother, I mean a sister, and is let loose, is back in the village.
A 5-year-old was actually, yes, defiled the other day.
Yes.
That's how heinous it is.
And then we're waiting for evidence, and I mean...
And then police requires you to put some money to expedite those
fuel,
investigations.
to go and get the victims.
Medical check.
Medical checkup at the health center for evidence, which is a bit traumatizing for the victims, for the rape, defilement victims. Definitely, it is setting a precedence of silence.
So, meaning, if I do not have money to foot these bills for the police officer to investigate, the case will not go forward.
Yes, and what is coming up now is negotiations. You find that families are negotiating so that the issue is handled and is solved at village level. And so another issue is that sometimes they want to protect the girl for the future marriage. So when that happens in the home, if a brother has defiled a sister, the
no
family
one in the community would want to marry such a girl.
Yes, so they will want to protect. They think in the name of protecting this girl for future marriage, this girl is left at risk, psychologically tortured, and you can expect that when she becomes a woman, an adult in the future, and she's a mother, or she's, I mean, she's a mother, she might do the same. Or if she's married, she's going to have psychological challenges, and that becomes a problem to the society. Like Jen has mentioned, as women rights defenders, we are actually actors, central actors in social change. And one of the social change we are looking at is us coming out to speak against defilement, speak against rape, to protect the girls who are teenage mothers, so that they're able to have a future. Then we can have a better society. We can have a transformed society where the girl child is protected. When you're talking about equality, and I mean, people are, young girls are defiled, children are defiled, their future is, I mean, is affected, and we are all quiet. I mean, we shall not have protected the rights of our children. And what hurts me most is when a mother is actually protecting the husband against a man who has defiled his own child.
You're protecting an animal.
Yes, because I mean, there are very many families where you hear stories about fathers sleeping with their children, and their mothers, in the name of tradition, in the name of culture, decide to keep quiet. And in so doing, they think they're protecting their children, but they are not. And so what will happen in the future, and the government that hasn't come out strongly to condemn this in the act of the judicial processes, in the government agencies that are supposed to protect the rights of Ugandans, because in the future we shall have a society that has psychological challenges, and so you find so many people getting into wrong and evil acts, and one is not able to tell that these started when these children were young, when they were defiled, and the child is aware that the father, the brother, the uncle, the grandfather defiled this child, and nobody was out there to protect her right. So it's a very pathetic situation that we need to fight against. And therefore, as women rights defenders, Even when we have the cultural norms, even when we have the traditional norms, when we have beliefs that think that we shouldn't speak out, we are ready to speak out.
Indeed.
We have challenges, we are condemned, we are called names, but we are ready to speak out. So that this girl can be a strong person in the future. So that we are able to see girls coming out and they become mothers.
Indeed.
And they can have better. We can have better children. We can have better youth, and we can have better Ugandans, and then we shall be a better Uganda.
Indeed.
Yeah.
That is Faith Tushabe. Yes, her humble submission actually entails why she is actually having a lot of wealth of information in that regard. 29 years of experience, 15 working at the secondary level, 5 years working in technical and various universities, and also the next 9 years she was working as a social worker in the community in that regard. That's why she's sharing all this information about what has befallen the entire communities as a result of the skyrocketing cases of teenage pregnancies and child marriages alike. Let's also bring in Jane Francis Oling and talk about the other issue of the role of the central government. What can they do in that regard? The issue of reprisals from the community. Tushabe said that's some of the reasons or factors that actually negate the possibility of some of these victims going to the judicial centers to seek justice in that regard. What can government do in this regard?
I think, one, it takes us back to COVID-19, how far and how much it hit our communities, it hit our society. I think one foremost thing is that government has to look at the psychosocial support bit, especially for these girls who have been victims of teenage pregnancies. And I also think government has to strengthen the witness protection. I think it is something I've been praying that we have to push to Parliament so that it's enacted into a much stronger law, that the witnesses have to be strengthened, I mean the witness protection, so that these girls can eventually have justice. And then the other thing is that there's this evidence that the police ask for, evidence beyond reasonable doubt. In many cases, this lets down sexual violence and crimes against girls and women, because you may not be able to get the evidence beyond reasonable doubt, and yet, indeed, the crimes have been committed. So something has to change. There has to be some flexibility in this evidence matter, so that we have our women and girls get evidence, get justice as far as the evidence issue is concerned. One other thing we are calling upon government to do is to recognize the women human rights defenders and work with them. Government has to recognize our work with us, and accept that the work we are doing only makes our society better, like Faith has put it. Because without the people standing in the gap, without the women human rights defenders, many things are happening, many crimes are being committed against the women and girls of this country, and there is no one to rise up and speak and maybe push some of these cases to police, even sanctioning files. By the way, there are many cases, Romeo, we had to push the police to have the file sanctioned and taken to court. And remember, justice delayed is justice denied.
Indeed.
So the earlier government recognizes and works with the women human rights defenders, the better. Because if we join hands and work together, in the near future, there will be no crimes, no sexual crimes against women and girls. This is one thing that is taking back our country, taking back our societies, because when women are not settled in homes and the girls are not even in schools, and there is a lot of violence in communities, then we are not getting anywhere. We can't talk about stability. Our country will not be stable. So this is a call to action that government should recognize every woman human rights defender in this country and work together with them.
But what we've been seeing, Jane Francis Oling, is a shrinking civic space. As of last year, at the tail end of last year, we did see UNET having its accounts frozen. I mean, UNET, you were talking about advancing health services to the young girls, educational services to the young girls, but they had their accounts frozen over many other issues. And then in August of this very year, 54 NGOs were shut down. these were human rights defenders working in various fields of accountability and governance. They saw their offices shut down. They do not have a voice right now. And of course, I'm reacting to your clarion call, where you're saying we should be working with the same government. But in the wake of the shrinking civic space, don't you think we are actually pouring water in a basket with holes?
No, and it's a good reminder, Emil. I think the closure of the 54 NGOs affects our work, it affects us, and I think the reasons had better come out clearly so that we know why our colleagues are not in the limelight anymore, they're not working, and this takes our space to zero. So if government could only have a fair, how do I call it? I mean, thorough investigations. What is happening? Is it worth closing these NGOs? These are the issues we want to hear from government, and then we also call upon the same government to make sure that those NGOs get back to their work so we can together develop this country. Many times, the human rights defenders in general have been mistaken to be the voice of the opposition. We are non-partisan.
Thank you.
We don't have political parties.
Indeed.
We are only standing in the gap to promote the human rights situation in our country, and so we call upon government to make enough verifications into the closure of those 54 NGOs so that there's justice even for them, and they can get back and work as development partners. Development partners.
Ms. Erling, do you think the interruptions in the work of these NGOs is the reason we are seeing this exponential rise in teenage pregnancies, early marriages, and so forth, drug abuse, and so forth? Do you think this is the reason as to why we are seeing a resurgence of the same? Because the clampdown on NGOs did not start in 2020. 2017, Action Aid, yes, they were also attacked. Their offices ransacked and so forth. Accounts frozen during that same year, 2017. So meaning it has been a precedence of shutting down NGOs, a shrinking civic space. Do you think if we hadn't interrupted your work as NGOs, we would be in a better position?
Yeah, I think so. I think so, because you know, we now think that the government looks at us as enemies, yet we are friends. Like Jen said, we are actually complementing government work. Before I answer that exclusively, I want to take you back to what the police does.
Please do.
And the probation officers in the different districts who can't reach everywhere. We have the Child and Family Protection Unit at the police station, but we do not have some of these at the village level, at the parish level, where the different rural or field-based human rights defenders are to protect the rights of these young children. And so if we do not come in to protect the rights of these children, I mean, the government officers can't reach everywhere. It is us on the ground. And probably I must say that because of what happened to our sister organizations, our fellow human rights defenders, we now fear.
Speaking because...
Yes, and especially women now fear. We are getting into the safe human rights defense work.
Self-censorship.
Yes, so you don't go into social accountability. When a child is defiled by one of the political, one who is a strong political leader, you fear to an MP, a chairman at LC level. We fear to get into that because we fear for our lives. And so when the 54 NGOs are crossed, that's a threat. It silences up. It silences us up. And so I think it's one of the means that has been used to silence most of the active human rights defenders. And so what is going to happen is that most of the people who are actually having human rights challenges will not be protected.
Indeed.
Because, I mean, if the defiler is an MP, a woman human rights defender will fear.
Indeed.
Because he is protected. It is about who do you know in this country. And so when you don't know anybody, it becomes very hard for you to defend the rights of that vulnerable person in favor of the one who is stronger.
And with more connection.
Yes, with more connection. And therefore, I think the government should come out. Our leader, the president, should come out and really put things straight, so that we have the agencies doing the right work without fear or favor, and so that a poor Ugandan does not feel that he's not a Ugandan, because there are people who are, it seems like there are people who are more Ugandan than the others, because there are those who can't speak, there are those whose rights will be stepped on, and they can't talk because they don't appear anywhere other than having an ID that shows that you're Ugandan, and therefore it's a very strong issue. And one of the things that I will go back to my passion about protecting the rights of the teenage mothers and the children. I think the government needs to come out and look into the psychosocial system. They need to have a very strong psychosocial system.
Especially now that we're talking about reopening of schools.
Yes, we are having children who are on the street every day. We have had this before. Now, what do you think is going to happen after COVID-19?
An explosion.
2 years. And so we're going to have a lot of crime on the streets.
Indeed.
So you are not safe in the city, and neither are you safe back in the village. And I think everybody is quiet about it.
Indeed.
And so when some of these our sister organizations who have been very strong in protecting the rights of Ugandans, of different Ugandans, because we have different areas of human rights violations, are crossed, then there's a big gap, a very big gap. And I think it's time, like Jen said, for government to appreciate human rights defenders, women rights defenders, that we complement government work, and that we are at the center of social change. And so if you're going to have a good Uganda, they need us as human rights defenders.
That is Ms. Faith Tushabe. She is a social worker, human rights defender, and also an educationist, boasting of over 15 years working at the secondary level, 5 years working at technical and the university levels. And we also do know that she has been working for 9 years as a community social worker. In tandem, there is 29 years
but by the way,
of experience coming to you.
I didn't mention to you that I was the executive director of African International Christian Ministry, AICM, started by Bishop Enoch Kayeye back in southwestern Uganda, to protect the rights of ethnic minorities, the Batwa, women, children, the youth, and for us who are down at the grassroots, there is quite a lot that is going on.
Of course, these ladies are testament that what a woman can do, or what a man can do, a woman can even do better. Thank you very much. Okay, that is Tushabe. Let's also bring in that is Mrs. Oling, Jen Francis Oling. She's the executive director for Women in Democracy. She's also the chairperson for the technical thematic working group at the National Coalition of Human Rights Defenders. I've been clamoring or itching to actually find out what this technical thematic working group actually does at the coalition. Go ahead.
Thank you, Romeo. And the technical thematic working group has many clusters represented.
Yes.
We have people living with disabilities. We have the youth.
Yes.
We have the women. We have the key population. We have the ethnic minorities. We have all these people represented under different clusters. And so this is what makes the technical thematic working group, to make sure that everyone else is represented. And so we represent also the issues arising from each thematic area, as far as the human rights issues are concerned, and take them to the secretariat, which is
where
the
Chiranga expedites.
Oh yeah, a great gentleman. Where all these issues are handled by the Secretariat, which is a governing body of the coalition. The coalition are the members. So the TTWG, which is the Technical Thematic Working Group, is a coordinating body that wires the issues of these clusters to the Secretariat, and this is how the human rights issues are handled. So
break down the role of the human rights defenders, and also break it down for us. Who is a human rights defender? Why? You have officials who think NGOs working in the areas of human rights are working with terrorists or even outside countries to actually front their interests. So right here and right now on this show, who is a human rights defender and what role do they do?
A human rights defender is an individual working to promote and uplift the human rights concerns of the other persons, be it children, women, and any member of the society. And they also do this work through very peaceful means, non-confrontational. That's why in many cases we don't confront the police, because it is a typical example of a human rights defender. And also the rights that we defend is typically what is within our constitution, and then also we so much work alongside the universal declarations of human rights. And so a human rights defender is that person who works in accordance to these issues that I've just mentioned, without any violence, without having to confront any authority, but they present their issues in the most professional ways.
What kind of milestones can you verifiably boast of as having been achieved by your coalition or any other human rights defender moving forward?
We have many success stories in that regard. One, of recent, we are seeing GBV issues, gender-based violence issues. A little bit, it has calmed down. If you look at the statistics compared to what was previously on ground, GBV is no longer, it's not that high. If you look at even the police crime report, GBV is coming down, and it has really calmed down. To me, this is a milestone. It is something we can smile about, much as we still have a journey to completely curb it out of our society. And then we can also talk about looking at so many women into our national leadership. And this means these women are also involved in decision making.
Affirmative action.
Affirmative action, something we fought so hard as women human rights defenders, encouraging our leaders, talking to the women at the grassroots to take up the leadership position, because we knew our issues and problems as women would have to come down if our own are up there at the national leadership. We have so many female ministers. Every time I look at them, I count it as joy, because much as they're there, they're also involved in programming, and they're involved in national decision making, like our budget for maternal health. If these women work hard, we can have about 6% of the national budget allocated to maternal health. And
because we are losing over 18% of all our mothers to these maternal deaths. All the deaths, 18% of them are owed to maternal deaths.
True. And
is it 3 in every 1,000 live births?
Yeah.
Indeed. Go ahead.
True. And so that brings a smile on our faces as the women human rights defenders. And also we look at issues of communities changing, no longer handling a lot of laws into their hands, and avoiding the courts of law, not reporting cases to police. That has also changed. These are issues that we feel are part of our success stories, and it's only a matter of time that we shall progress and have this country a better country for everyone.
Have you registered any strides in the number of women actually participating in the elective processes of their country? We're talking about women running for office, women actually, getting involved in the political processes of their country. Largely, as NMG, we did expedite investigations, and we did discover close to 8 million people did not vote in last year's election, majority of whom were women. They did not go to the polls. So do you think we are making any milestones in that regard, women participating in the political processes of their country, or are there gaps, and what are they?
True. I want to start with the issue of the women not voting like 80%. It could be due to several issues here and there. And also, I'm getting back to the men. When it's time to participate into active politics, women are supposed to go and vote. And you find this gentleman who does not allow his wife to leave the gate. She's not allowed to leave home, and yet voting is her fundamental right. So I think those are the issues. Those are issues that stop women from actively participating in politics. Even if these men stop the women from getting out to go and vote, we have many women who successfully got to parliament. They successfully got into other political appointments. They're in different offices, and we are going to work hard to see that women start voting and the men give them the rights to their, I mean, the rights to vote.
All right, besides their spouses giving them leeway to go and vote, there were also other factors negating the ability of the women to go to the polls. The violent nature of the elections. You did have 54 people being killed in 2020 in November. There is no way a woman would get close to such, you know, an activity if it's going to be, you know, leading to the loss of life and so forth. That's what we do know. Women always withdraw from such activities.
Yeah,
and this is when we call upon the government. It takes me back to the call to action. We call upon the government of Uganda to have enough dialogue with all political parties aggrieved and the ones with complaints through peaceful means, so that an election we are holding in this country again does not be described by violence. I equally witnessed the violence during elections. Why would the men in uniform, our gallant UPDF soldiers, take charge of elections? We must be peaceful enough to conduct our elections without gunshots, without violence, because this also threatens the voters and especially the women. If you look at those 80%, that 80% of the women who are not able to vote, it's because they fear to be armed. I mean, they fear to be victims of this violence. So our next election, I'm calling upon government that we should work round the clock. We should do anything possible to make sure that the elections are peaceful. This is our country. We do not need to, to make things look like we are not in charge.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Tushabe, having more women representatives in government would mean more policies geared towards working to offer reprieve to young teen mothers or any other sphere that is actually touching the aspect of young women in that regard. But then the fact that the women are not clamoring for these elective processes, what comes to your mind?
I think, if you may allow me,
please.
I want to point out that the levels of education limits the women into the lower political spaces. And
waiting for affirmative action.
Yeah, so they get onto the affirmative action gap and fail to get onto the other open levels where they can easily compete with the men. And so the levels of education, poverty levels, because you will agree with me that the politics in Uganda are managed by money. How much you have and how much you can have, you can give out to people to vote for you.
Indeed.
And so you find that women can't afford that. They don't have property. They don't own property.
Land.
And so land, property, so they are not able to get loans from the bank.
To go and participate.
To go and participate. But in areas where they are, in positions where they are, the women have come up. And I'm very happy with the women movement. I'm part of the women movement, where we have come up and we are training women and we are sensitizing them and we are advocating and lobbying to make sure that they get into the political space. And so when you go to the lower levels where they are, and they have easily competed with men, you'll find that they have done good work. You will trust me that the women are more accountable than the men, if you agree with me. If it comes to corruption, women are not at the level of the men. And therefore,
you're more compassionate.
Yes, we are more compassionate.
You wouldn't steal 200 billion shillings knowing there's a young child somewhere who will go to bed hungry and angry at the same time.
We wouldn't. If you look at the trend of corruption in Uganda, you don't see women stealing that much compared to the men. I wouldn't say we are angels, but I would say that when you look at the credibility of a woman, it's better than that of a man.
Indeed.
And so if we could have more men, more women in the political position, I want to guarantee that the status of a young girl, the pride of a young girl would be, the situation that is now on would not be what it is now. And so I still want to call upon government, like Jen said, that it is time for them to appreciate that women are very key in social change.
Indeed. But what will it take, Tushabe and Oling, what will it take for us to expedite that conducive, safe environment that would allow women to participate in the electoral processes of their country? Let me kickstart with you, Tushabe, since you have the mic already.
I think we need to feel safe. By the nature of being a woman, you are unsafe by the nature of being a woman. You are created woman, and so you feel unsafe by that fact itself. And so when you talk about uniform, men in uniform, we have cases. I was involved in the Women's Situation Room 2021 elections, and I was the gender analyst for Southwestern Uganda.
Indeed.
And I got all sorts of reports about the gendered threats. When we have gender threats, then it affects the women, and getting them into politics becomes a challenge. We have had women who were kidnapped, if I may give an example of Kigezi, where a woman was kidnapped and she disappeared for 4 days. What she went through during that time is another story. I mean, that's a silence. That's an act that silences us. It becomes very hard for me to get out into politics in fear of what may happen to me when I disappear for 4 days.
Indeed.
And then it affects your family. Your husband getting you back after 4 days of disappearance. It affects you psychologically. You feel ashamed. You don't fit in the community when you're back. And therefore, for those who are able to see these sad stories,
they'll withdraw.
Yes, they withdraw. If you look at the stories and pictures of women who are arrested by police in Uganda, when they're bundled on the pickups.
Even a young teenager who is watching the news and was thinking, okay, at some point I want to become an MP so that I expedite policies that help my fellow young women, would be like, no way.
You do not want to be humiliated in that way. You do not want to be violated in that way. And so many women want to feel safer out of politics because it is safer. Because in politics you are exposed, you are the forefront, and everybody's watching, and anything can happen. And so I think, to me, that is what the problem is. And unless we come out, we have strong voices of women coming out and speaking in protection of these young girls and teenage girls, young baby girls, then we still have a big problem.
Okay. The reason why we've fused this conversation with skyrocketing teenage pregnancies and also women in politics is simply because if you had more women in politics representing these young women, they would have expedited already policies that would go a long way in offering reprieve to actually clamp down on the skyrocketing teenage pregnancies, also track down the number of young children that have been actually forcefully married off. Has government even expedited that move to investigate how many of our children have been married off forcefully since March of 2020? Or are we waiting for the remnants of the same taking center stage 10 years from now, 30 years from now, when these children are older and they do not have school fees or any other basic amenities accorded to them? Oling, talk to me about that. What needs to be done to create a conducive environment through which women will be able to clamor for elective posts and also come up with policies that will go a long way to, help the young teen mothers we are talking about right now?
Earlier, this government recognizes these women who speak for the others like we are doing. That is a first step. If they recognize, protect us, and defend us in the course of our work, so that many women human rights defenders will come up to join us in the work we are doing. I think that is a first very good step that will give us a good space to, speak for the others, and then continue to encourage even those little girls to grow up and become very productive women in all areas, and they can serve their country in different areas. But the moment we are threatened, the likes of me and Faith, the moment we are threatened, unlawfully arrested, detained, even some cases when they want to manage you well, they'll put you in the male cells to reduce these talking things of yours. Silence you.
Oling, are you telling us right now on this show that sometimes women have been put in the same jail cell with men?
Yes. And this person was at a national level. She was a political figure. When they went for the rallies in Oyam, they claimed that the cells were not enough, and she was put in a male cell.
Human rights violation. Go ahead.
And so this matters once they stop. Then we have a free space to do our work. But there are indicators, there are things that threaten us, and there are things that threaten our work. And once they continue, I can assure you, many women human rights defenders might fear, and they may not be able to come up and speak and defend the rest. So it's one thing that we feel if government does, we are able to go ahead with our work. And then the other thing is also to continue to support our work, and government should also take it upon itself to protect the girls from being victims of teenage pregnancies by wholesomely handling the perpetrators and giving tough measures that will stop them from impregnating our girls. Even babies of like less than 10 years are being defiled. So where is our country going to? Now, if tough measures are put in place by government, we shall not witness some of this sexual violence against the minors, not only teenage, but even those minors that you would not imagine. You can imagine someone defiling a child of 5 years.
Indeed.
So we need to handle these issues very seriously. And I also want to call upon the Uganda Police Force to go back to the drawing board and make sure that these people are arrested, taken to court, and there is respect for the 48-hour rule, and immediately files are worked on, and the court procedure starts, the hearing. And this is why we do watching brief in court.
Indeed.
We want to see that some of these key cases like GBV,
go all the way.
Defilement and very sensitive cases are well handled. But if the police starts delaying with the suspect, not sanctioning the files, we are letting down the justice for these people.
And when the judicial system says, please, Romy Busiku and this young girl, please get out of the court system and negotiate. The mediations, are they part of the problem?
No, mediation is part of the problem, because even cases that ought to be heard by court, I don't know whether it's because of backlog or I don't know, but they will send away this case and ask the parties involved to have mediation. Me, I would like to agree with you that it's lack of interest. And so when they go for mediation, so what? They've lost it. No justice for this small girl, because in the mediation, the parents might be promised some 5 cows, maybe some 2 million, and the case ends there.
And of course, this would set a bad precedent, because other would-be perpetrators would know that, oh, all I have to do is part with 5 or 10 cows, then I go and violate another girl. That's all that it takes.
And this escalates, and it makes these criminals find a safer space for them to keep on. You defile this child, you have compensated the family, you go to another district and defile another child. So what we are saying is government should take charge over issues of mediation. Sometimes it's laziness from court. If you think a case can be mediated upon, then you first have to look and examine what is involved into that matter that you're chasing away from court. So lack of interest, I want to call it, is another indicator that is bringing a lot of injustice to our people, and government has to take charge and watch over some of these courts. This is why watching brief is very important. You sit in court and see even the body language of the person cross-examining a child witness and analyze what this matter is likely to turn up to. So such things have to stop so that our people get justice, and then crimes against children and women will have to end if we handle our judicial processes very well and with tough measures. Jane
Francis Aling, the Executive Director of Women in Democracy Uganda. She's also the chairperson of the Technical Thematic Working Group at the National Coalition of Human Rights Defenders. She's not alone. We also do have Tushabe Faith. She is actually a social worker, human rights defender, and an educationist, boasting with over 29 years of working experience. Tushabe, yes, 600,000 teenage pregnancies could largely translate into human rights violations, touched down because these young women were actually forced into these sexual activities against their will in that regard. So let's talk about what needs to be done right now ahead of Uganda's periodic review that is in January of 2022 in light of all this happening. UONET having trouble, 54 NGOs being shut down, young women being impregnated, others forced into early marriages, police officers and military rearing their very ugly heads, beating up citizens. What do you make of this country's outlook in the Universal Periodic Review of January of 2022?
Have been part of the Universal Periodic Review.
Indeed.
And under the National Coalition of Human Rights Defenders, have participated, and we have been given different recommendations for the the Ugandan review that will take place between January and Feb 2022. And we have worked with government. We have worked with the Ministry of, I think, Foreign Affairs, and we have worked through and discussed some of these human rights challenges that are taking place in Uganda. And I think one of the things that is going to actually, to me, it is humiliating. the rising numbers of teenage pregnancies in Uganda is really humiliating, because you wouldn't imagine that a country that is boasting of middle class citizens are still having teenage pregnancies of the numbers that we see in the papers. And therefore, in the coming UPR, I believe that it is not going to be a good story for us, Uganda, because we should be outgoing certain, as we get into development, sustainable development, we shouldn't be getting into such issues of teenage pregnancies on the rise instead of decrease.
Indeed.
And we have put recommendations as women human rights defenders. I think
some of which include?
I think I will leave that to the coalition.
I
know the coalition has been here a lot,
Working on their report.
Yes, they have worked on the UPR, and they have been on NTV for a long time talking about the UPR. And so I really want to leave that, because they have been the leading.
Exhaustive submission.
They have done that well.
Indeed.
But I know we have put comments, but one of the things that we are commending, we need safe spaces for the young girls, but then also we need a strong psychosocial system for the young girls. I think that's one thing that I would recommend, even if I didn't go to the UPR, that's one thing that I would recommend for Uganda.
But what recommendation do you have for, number one, the state actors, the donor community, and also, let me see, members of the community, as far as what we need to be doing to promote the good work of the women human rights defenders? Right now, I'd like to talk about the women human rights defenders and what needs to be done for them to execute their work very greatly.
One, for the state, I think the state needs to appreciate that the state needs the women human rights defenders.
We do.
Because we work with them, we complement the government work, and therefore we need to get closer.
And the victims trust you.
Yes, and they need to protect us. They need to be a protection system for the women rights defenders, so that we don't fear the non-state actors and the state actors whom we are supposed to work with. And secondly, I think the government of Uganda needs to invest in psychosocial support. Because we have so many street children coming up, we have so many teenage pregnancies, we have very many rural people who are in poverty, and so the crime rate is going higher. When you look at what is happening now, the crime rate is going higher, and therefore we need to have a psychosocial system that will help the Ugandans. Another thing is that we need shelters for the GBV cases. The shelters that we have so far have been put in place by civil society organizations and the international community. The international community is coming in, yes. Civil society organizations are coming in, yes. But what is the government doing?
Thank you very much, Tushabe Faith. What is the government doing? That is the $64,000 question. In a minute, Olenjen Francis, please speak to the victims of sexual violence and also the victims of human rights violations in Uganda as we wrap up. Come on.
I think as a summary, we must not fear to report cases of sexual violence. We must not fear to bring evidence to court. And I would want to advise the victims of sexual violence, do not rush to bathe. Do not rush to tamper with the evidence. Run straight to the police. And if possible, this evidence can be extracted and very helpful in the course of the prosecution. So you must not tamper with evidence. You must not fear to blow the whistle. You must not fear to talk about corruption involved in the judicial processes.
Thank you.
This will help us go a long way. Thank you very much.
That is Olenjen Francis, the Executive Director of Women in Democracy. She's also the chairperson of the Technical Thematic Working Group at the National Coalition of Human Rights Defenders. She was never alone. Faith Tushabe was also with us, a social worker, human rights defender, and also an educationist boasting with over 29 years of working experience. Thank you very much, ladies, for having made the time to speak to us on this very pertinent conversation. Indeed. Looking forward to our next encounter. You're still watching NTV Uganda. We do have, yes, NTV at 1 coming to you shortly in an hour. I'll be right back to give you the latest happening around the country and also the world. Good day.